Hey, Eagles fans, this is Chris Franklin from NJ Advanced Media, and welcome back to the No-Huddle Show podcast, where we discuss anything and everything related to the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, before we begin, I just want to remind you that you can read our content on NJ.com/Eagles and make sure to bookmark that to get the latest Eagles news and analysis. You can also subscribe to our Eagles exclusive Eagles Extra Insider Text service. We'll break news on top of that. You can also go ahead and follow all of our accounts on Twitter, X, whatever you call it, or Threads, what have you. We're pretty much everywhere where you can find on that one. But today's episode, we're going to talk briefly a little bit, get into some of these training camp battles that are going on, give you updates on that. We're going to talk about the first upcoming preseason game that's going to happen Friday night, we hope. Thanks to if Debbie doesn't have her way with this game against the Baltimore Ravens at M&T Bank Stadium in Baltimore. And we're going to talk about a legend who decided to call it a career after delivering the first and only Super Bowl to the city of Philadelphia. But first off, Bob, Cayden, how are you guys doing today?
Go ahead, Cayden. You tell them first how you're doing.
Yeah, doing good. Right. Tomorrow, hopefully, we get some football, back, whether it's second and third stringers, mainly it's still football. So that would be, fun for not only for fans, but for us to kind of have that feel back. And, it'll be fun. Not fun is not the right way to say it, but eventful to see, Chris, you mentioned Hurricane Debbie, how we all, drive through it and navigate our way through 95 down to Baltimore with rain and possible tornadoes. But it's going to be a fun day. I'm excited to, cover some football tomorrow.
Hey, we got. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bob.
No, we got 29 days. I think today is opening day against the Green Bay Packers. So looking forward to all that.
Yeah, that's the one thing about training camp when you look at about how fast the stuff goes. Like it takes so long for training camp to get here. Next thing you know, practice after practice after practice goes, and we're already up to the first preseason game. But before we even get into that, I want to talk to you guys about a report that came out from ESPN's Tim McManus and Jeremy Fowler that specifically focused on the relationship of Eagles quarterback Jalen Hurts and head coach Nick Sirianni. Now, inside that report, it talked about there was issues with the relationship last year with the two having not the best relationship. Fractured was a word used in terms of that. There, among the other notes that were used in there, there's a third party that had to be present at times when the two met last year to try to ease some of the tensions. And Hurts even reached out to former Giants defensive coordinator Wink Martindale for insights on how the Giants were so successful in getting to the blitz and getting pressure and really stymieing the Eagles offense in that season finale. And we saw how, for lack of better words, how bad that offense looked and they couldn't move the ball around there, and it led to success. Now when we've seen them so far in training camp, we've all three have seen them. They've been buddy. Everything's looked good on the outside. And then we even saw Hurts driving Sirianni and Big Dom in Big Dom's cart. And I was waiting for Eazy-E start to come in the background blasting it because they were just driving around like, hey, what's up, guys? How you doing? All right. It's like, okay, it's kind of fun. But, we still haven't gotten into the true season where the live bulls will fire and we'll see some live things. So I want to ask both of this. I'll start with you, Bob, first. They say they're in a good place right now. Do you think things are really okay between them? And if something were to pop up along the season, they say they had like a brief losing streak or the offense struggles, what have you, do you think they can navigate the downturn without these problems resurfacing again?
You didn't see that cart that they were on. It had the wheels going up and down. It was cool. It was awesome. I think things are okay. Yes. Do I think that they're best friends? That they'll ever be best friends? No, but I don't think they need to be best friends. I think the fact that Kellen Moore is now the offensive coordinator and in charge of the offense, and Nick is kind of in charge of the team, I think they found a good place for that coach quarterback relationship. They don't have to be best friends. Nick's not going to be around them all the time. One of the things, and to me, the lead was kind of buried in that story because I thought the most interesting thing was that he called Wink Martindale. That was the freshest thing in there. I found that really fascinating, having covered Wink Martindale too. It is clear that they apparently weren't on the same page with what they wanted offensively last year. Then on top of that, the team just completely fell apart. And I think it goes back to the thing about chemistry. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? Has any bad team ever had good chemistry? In my experience, and I've been doing this for 40 years, no. You never hear a team that finished 20 games under in baseball, or 6-10 or 6-11. Yeah, our chemistry was great though. So it was bad chemistry. It was bad karma. It was bad everything. But every season starts fresh, and right now they're in a fresh mode. And as Jalen put it, we have different people doing different things, and that matters. It's a new season, and to him, it was a really fascinating news conference with Jalen, especially because at first he kind of just answered the questions, and it was about Wink Martindale. Those were the questions that came first, and he was like, I'm just looking for every avenue to get better and be better. And then some more questions came, and finally he's like, well, all of a sudden everybody asked me about Wink Martindale. And then, it was explained, and then he was like, he kind of shut it down and wanted to go a different direction, which I don't blame him, because, it does him or the Eagles no benefit to rehash what happened last year, because they're looking forward, and they have to look forward. They have different players. They have a star running back now. They're trying to fill out the offensive line. And I'll just leave it one more thing. One thing that went completely unmentioned, and I kind of write about it for Friday ahead of this first preseason game, because I think was the biggest reason of all for the collapse, and it doesn't even get mentioned, was the defense just completely fell apart. During that 6 losses in 7-game stretch, the Eagles allowed, I forget the exact numbers, 380-something yards, 30.5 points per game. And if that is what they had done overall for the entire season, they would have been last in the NFL in both categories. So it was a complete meltdown. Yes. Did the Nick Jalen dynamic play a part in it? Yes. But it's, I think it's time for this team to move on. And I think they want to move on. That's been the main message in this training camp. Is last year, we don't want to talk about last year. And several guys, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Jordan Mailata, among others, have said no more last year.
Nice. What do you think, Cayden? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, at the end of the day, I don't see it being a problem this year, unless things go completely off the rails and the Eagles aren't very good. And then, Nick's job security and Kellen's job security, all those guys are going to be in trouble. So what they say in the league is winning cures all. And like it says at the end of that article that was well done by Tim McManus and Jeremy Flowers, maybe they wouldn't get dinner together, but, it's a respectful working relationship, and that's all that matters. And Bob made a good point, especially with Kellen being in there, and kind of Jalen interacting with him more on a one-on-one basis. I don't think him and Nick are going to have as many problems as they did last year. It seems like where they weren't seeing eye to eye was the offensive strategy. It even said in there that basically Jalen didn't have much respect for Nick's X's and O's, and the offense wasn't as good last year. So obviously they didn't see eye to eye, and the Eagles as an organization felt like they needed to change offensively. Now they brought Kellen more in, and they're hoping he fixes that. But I think as long as Jalen and Nick can get along in a working relationship, it's not going to be something that probably ends up derailing the team. There's so many professions in this world where, an employee and the boss, don't necessarily love each other, but they get along enough to make things work and make things, so there's good production going on. So I don't see it as a big problem. And also with Bob, I think the most interesting parts were the Martindale parts, just kind of showing you how, Jalen's wired. I'm not sure if every quarterback is calling an opposing defensive coordinator, even though by the report, they say they parted ways by them, but you don't see that very often, or at least we don't hear about it. And then the part where Nick talked about, or he talked about it yesterday, but in the story, how he got in front of the team and he took about accountability, and he brought up his daughter and how, if he didn't took accountability in this world and showed his daughter to take accountability, and, it just wouldn't be right for him to do that, because he has to show her what it means to be accountable. He has to show his team what it means to be accountable. So I thought it was refreshing they hear him say that. And if Nick and Jalen both take accountability for what happened last year and they move on, everything's going to be fine. So we'll see what happens. So you never know with a new year.
All right, cool. That's a good points by both of you guys in terms of that. And we're going to move on now since we won't see them having to be under a lot of stress coming up on Friday night. We briefly mentioned this earlier that the Eagles are going to play the Ravens. And one thing that we didn't see last year and not much during the Nick Sirianni tenure is the starters playing in the preseason. And there's two schools of thought. One is, do you keep them fresh so there's nobody that's hurt and you get them ready for the regular season? The other one is you need to play them and make sure that these guys get reps because you have two new coordinators and you want them to get acclimated to their systems in live rounds as well, too, in live calls. So, Cayden, I'm going to start you with this one, too. When it comes to playing these starters, do you feel comfortable enough to put them on the field Friday so they can get some work?
Yeah, my answer, I think, has changed somewhat because of the weather. With the way things were during the first, part of this training camp, we've seen them with longer practices. They've talked about how things have been more physical compared to any other year in the Nick Sirianni era so far. And I thought going in that maybe we'd see some work from the starters for a half a quarter or a couple series. But with the projected rain, and even though if it kind of simmers down during the game, the field's still going to be wet. I'm just not sure if they're going to be willing to take the risk with their star players in this game. And I think it's a good thing overall to play some. We see the Chiefs are doing it with Mahomes. Andy Reid's never afraid to play his starters. I don't think it's a bad thing. And if it weren't going to be pouring down rain and really don't know what the weather is going to be, it looks like it's a little unpredictable. And make me feel a little more uneasy, even though I do think this team might need it. But with the next week, you had the joint practices against the Patriots. You're going to get a lot of good work in there. And I just don't know if it's a need, knowing that next week's coming up with joint practices. You'll still have one more preseason game with the Vikings on the 24th. Maybe you could get a series in if you want to do that. It might be a little risky there as well. But I just think the weather's throwing a curveball in all of this.
All right, Bob, do you take the chance of going and putting them out against the Ravens, or do you say, you know what, sit on the sideline and watch and cheer on your people from there?
Yeah, I'm with Cayden on this entirely. Earlier in the week I was like, yeah, let's see the starters for a series. I went back to 2022. They did play the starters. Jalen Hurts went 6 for 6 for 80 yards, threw a touchdown to Dallas Goedert to end the series. The defense was on the field. They ended their series with an interception against the Jets. Zach Wilson, so maybe that was not – he was the starter, but not really. But anyway, and there's some momentum there. There was also a play out of bounds that he gets hit and scared the bejesus out of everybody. But I have no problem. And, if Andy Reid, as Cayden said, is willing to do it, then it can't be all that bad a thing to do. We see in these joint practices that the teams are so eager to have that guys get hurt there too. Although I guess the Jets today held Aaron Rodgers out because of weather. I think I would hold guys out because of this weather thing. I do think it's a little too risky because the weather's going to be so bad, and I think the field is going to still be wet. But I would like to see the starters play, and I think. I don't know. We'll see what happens if it happens next week or this week because of the weather. But I think we're going to see some on defense because there's so many position battles there. So they don't know who some of the starters are. So we're going to see some of those guys, and maybe we even see that on offense at right guard tomorrow with Becton and Tyler Steen battling for that job. So maybe we do see some and some of the number 3 receivers, although that's not really a starting job. But, it's just it is too risky with this weather going. So I don't think we see him tomorrow, but maybe at some point. And overall, I'm for the idea of playing starters a little bit in the preseason. And just make this one final point quick. If I was a fan, I'd really be ticked off because, these teams put more emphasis on these joint practices, and yet the fans have to pay for the preseason game that they put less emphasis on. You know what? Then if these joint practices are more important. Then let the fans pay for a joint practice ticket and go watch those. And I'd rather watch that in the stadium if I was a fan. I'll just make that quick point and peace out on that subject.
Well, you know what? I want to play. Just because I got a quick follow up, and either one of you guys can answer this one in terms of that. Where do they make up some of this live stuff? I know we talked about the joint practice, but they only had one this year in terms of that. Do you risk it during, say, practice or whatever, having them go live more? I mean, we saw more third team guys doing live, but it can take us. And when you start week 1 against the Green Bay Packers, you have a very pivotal game, a game which probably will have playoff implications when it's all said and done. But knowing that the Packers are expected to be one of the better teams in the NFC. Where do you make up that time besides that one joint practice in order to have these guys ready to go for the season?
It's a good.
Go ahead, Kayon.
It's a good point, Chris, because you would think next week would be the only real opportunity other than the Ravens game, because you don't really want to do it in that type practice setting. You mentioned seeing the third stringers, but I really am not sure if Nick would feel comfortable, throwing them out, having live tackling a couple of weeks before the season, and then in that last preseason game, it's really when typically even the teams that do play the starters, that's the time you don't play the starters. So it's going to be a tough choice. Perhaps they could give them some looks in that Vikings game, a series or two. Maybe they feel like that wouldn't hurt, and you'd be fresh off the third preseason game, and you get some reps for the starting first-team defense and first-team offense. But there is an innate risk of doing that so close to the season. But it's going to be a tough balance.
I think the answer, and I'll give it quick, is that you don't. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes these teams, the preseason extends into the season. Sometimes that's, I think, why you see good teams even get off to slow starts, and because they're not really prepared and ready to play, and so the preseason extends into those first week or two of the season, and teams aren't ready and don't start to hit their stride to week 3 or week 4.
Very true. Good point. Good stuff on that. And we're close to book. But, on terms of that, we're keeping it focused on preseason related. There's still some guys who are still working their way, trying to prove that they belong on this roster. There's still some guys who really, really want to make sure that, hey, I want that starting job. I think I should do this. There's so many guys. There's 90 guys on our roster that really try to stand out. I'll start with you, Cayden, on this one. Who do you think still has a lot to prove and needs to have a good showing when we watch them on Friday night?
Yeah, there's so many players that you could to pick from, but the guy that I would go with that has the most on the line at this current stage is Nakobe Dean coming into this game. Right now, he's behind Zach Bond and Devin White, at least from the looks of it. I mean, been consistently every day, those have been the guys going up with the first team. Nakobe, frankly, during practices, going back to the open practice, last Thursday, even at times this week, has not looked the best in coverage. And to be frank, and even when Vic talked in his press conference, it's pretty much admitted that Nakobe didn't have the best night on the open practice. He's just not been what I expected, and I think a lot of people expected coming from Georgia last year. Had the 2 foot injuries, never really got a chance to kind of establish himself. This was the third year, right? The make or break year. They brought in Devin White and Zach Bond. Devin White got a decent bit of money, but it's a 1-year deal. And Zach Bond, another 1-year deal for not a ton of money. This was Nakobe's job. There was an opportunity, if he played really well, to win it. Zach Bond and Devin White were not going to prevent him, but he hasn't been good enough in training camp. And if you can't cover in the NFL, you have a very, very limited role. I mean, there's not a lot of guys that are just specialty run defenders and guys who could blitz who see a ton of snaps in the NFL. You got to be able to do all three. You got to be able to cover. You got to be able to defend the run. And he just right now he can do about half of those things. And I'm just not sure about the effectiveness. And Vic is a guy that it just seems like, doesn't care necessarily about draft status. He doesn't care about pedigree. He's going to play the guys who give him the best chance to win. And right now, for what Nakobe Dean's shown in training camp, not sure if he is that guy. And maybe he has a role in this defense because we know Vic likes simulated pressures. Maybe he'll want to use Nakobe on certain packages to get after the quarterback. But right now, it just seems like a guy who had a lot of potential at first, or at least coming out. That's what people thought, to a guy that's kind of lost in the mix at linebacker. And Jeremiah Trotter has had a pretty decent to strong camp, and Ben Van Sumeren's a guy that they might like as well. So just think about the future. I'm not sure Nakobe has 1 year after he's in his third year of his rookie deal. He's got one more year after this. Really, what's his long-term future with the Eagles if he doesn't get it together? So he's got a ton on the line, not only for this year, but for next year as well.
Bob, whose throat's going to be a little more closed when they realize, they're going to have to be able to play well, even if it's the first preseason game, they have to play well to start to stand out.
Yeah, to me, this is a guy the Eagles really need to start standing out and really show that they're ready to be a top-flight NFL player, and that's Nolan Smith. He was a first-round pick last year, a late first-round pick, but they've lost Hassan Reddick. Yes, Bryce Huff, a lot of pressure on him to prove he's a guy that can do the job. But Nolan Smith was a guy that I think going into his second season, the Eagles expected bigger things from him. Josh Sweat and Bryce Huff are going to be the main two guys, but they need him to be an integral part of that rotation. So we need right now to start seeing some things from him in the preseason and have it carry over into the season. He has to be part of a rotation that proves it can apply the kind of pressure that this team had 2 years ago when they were so good at rushing the passer.
All right, guys, and now we're going to move on to now. There's a lot of there's three main competitions that are going on right now in terms of that. Bobby briefly touched on it in terms of Mekhi Becton and Tyler Steen going on the guard spot. Cayden, you briefly mentioned about the linebackers in terms of Nakobe Dean, Devin White, and according to the depth chart, now you have to look at as believe it or not, Jeremiah Trotter is part of that competition along with Zach Bond. And then cornerback wise, you have to look at, you still got Isaiah Rodgers and Kelee Ringo. And do you worry about Quinyon Mitchell or somebody else coming up and taking that job? So I'm going to start with you on this, Bob. If you had to think of those three competitions, where do you think the most unlikely person to start is going to come from in terms of those three spots?
I'm going to go with cornerback, and because I think it would be unlikely if Kelee Ringo ended up getting that job, or Isaiah Rodgers. I don't think they were really, looked upon as. I think a lot of people thought Quinyon Mitchell was a first-round pick, and that he would be one of those. He would be the cornerback opposite Slay to start the season. But that hasn't been the way things have really developed in camp. Quinyon has seen some time outside, and I think ultimately he's going to be an outside cornerback. I know he's going to ultimately be an outside cornerback. But it looks like they're interested in him in both the nickel and dime, primarily in that slot. And Rodgers and Ringo have kind of gone at it in camp, going back and forth in terms of the first-team reps. So if either one of those guys, Rodgers or Ringo, ends up being a starter, I would say I'd be surprised from where I thought things were at the start of training camp to where they are now going into the season.
Cool. Cayden, who do you think, what position do you think is going to have the surprise coming from?
Yeah, from those three, I kind of want to go with linebacker because of what Nick Sirianni said about Zach Bond the other day, kind of bringing him up out of nowhere, and talking about his toughness. Makes me feel like Devin White and Zach Bond are far ahead, and Nakobe doesn't have as great of a shot. But I do think that, if Nakobe plays well in the preseason games, maybe he can make a late push at that. So the guy that is trending downwards and I feel is very unlikely is Tyler Steen. And not saying that, Mekhi Becton has come in and just run away and he's looked so dominant in training camp, because don't think that's been the case so far, but just missing that extended period of time. He struggled, in the few appearances he had last year against Dallas, and he came in that Washington game as well. It's tough to make up ground in training camp when you miss those reps, and it seems like the offense is comfortable. Mekhi running with the first team. He did it yesterday. He didn't see them really rotating, and for whatever reason, the Eagles seemed interested in Becton. He wasn't great in New York. The injuries played a huge role in that, and struggled with his weight when he was there, and it just didn't work. I mean, just to be fair, he was a first-round bust, but with everything that happened, came out last year, played played every game, which was a huge accomplishment for him, and he talked about. But this is a fresh start, and Jeff Stoutland obviously sees something in him, and you don't see a lot of 6'7", guys with that frame and that size playing guard. But the Eagles must believe in him, and he's got a big opportunity if he plays well in the preseason to really, really, really secure it. And I think he's going to have to play pretty bad for Tyler Steen to catch up. And I can see him just being good enough to be the starter. And they want that rapport. I mean, Lane Johnson's talked about how he kind of wants to get those reps in, and he has been for the last few weeks with Mekhi Becton. So right now, Tyler Steen's got a lot of catching up to do, and he needs a little help from Mekhi Becton as well.
All right. And before we go, it wouldn't be it would be weird without even bringing this up in terms of some news that came out today. Former Super Bowl 52 MVP Nick Foles announced his retirement, and it capped off a pretty interesting career in terms of when he was with the Eagles. He looked like a top 10 quarterback in the league. I mean, everybody still remembers the 27 touchdown, 2 interception season he had under Chip Kelly. Obviously, everybody remembered how he replaced Carson Wentz and helped lead the team to the Super Bowl. And had it not been for a drop pass against the New Orleans Saints in 2018, might have actually led him to another appearance in the Super Bowl again. I mean, a lot of people think that he was going to be able to do that. So I'll start with you, Bob. In this one, you've seen Foles. You've gotten to talk to him during your tenure being around the Eagles. Where does he stand among the hierarchy of quarterbacks who've played for this team?
I'm going to label him as the most fascinating quarterback in Eagles history, by far and away. And that's no small compliment, given some of the guys who have played quarterback for this team. Let's talk about Randall Cunningham and Donovan McNabb. Even Jim McMahon was such a personality when he was here. And Jalen's here now. But what a story he is. His record with the Eagles was 25-13. His record as a starting quarterback, and that counts the 4-2 record in the playoffs. His record with every other team he played for, which was the Bears, Colts, Jags, and Chiefs and Rams, was 8-18. He was in the Eagles release. I forget what he's top 10, or I think the best passer rating in franchise history at 93.2, and he's in the top 10 in a bunch of other categories. And yet, whenever he went anywhere else, it didn't work. The only place that really worked for him was Philadelphia. You talk about, he's in the record books with Peyton Manning and Wyatt Tittle as the only guys to ever throw 7 touchdowns without an interception in a game. He did that in his first stint here in 2013. I remember doing a story on him. So when he came back for a second stint, going to him, and there was back when we were allowed to walk in the hallways, and there was a thing, a giant story from the Inquirer on the wall, highlighting that game from that game, the 7 touchdown game. And I was like, how cool is it to be the backup quarterback of a team? And every day you walk in and there's a story about you, just what you did at your record setting day. And he was like, yeah, it's pretty cool. But, he was always a mellow guy. He was fun to cover. I will say this: I was at that Super Bowl he won. I got to see his greatest moment of his career, and a lot of great moments in his career, and also got to see his final play of his career, which was against the Giants 2 years ago in 2022. The next to last game of the season, he got sacked by Kayvon Thibodeau, broke his ribs, and as he's laying on the ground, Kayvon Thibodeau is doing snow angels and hitting him in the leg or wherever, hitting him on the body. And it's like, wow, that's, now that I think about it, what a weird end to a strange career, but a great career. There's going to be a debate. Probably they're going to pay tribute to him September 16th at the link when they play the Falcons. That's pretty cool. I'm sure at some point there's going to be some kind of debate whether they should retire as number 9. I don't think they should do that. He's got a statue in front of the stadium already. Philly will forever be remembered, and just an incredible story. Just a great story.
And Kayon, what do you say? You and I didn't have a chance to cover him uniquely. The closest I've got to him was seeing him on the stage at when I was covering the news side of the Super Bowl parade. But what are your thoughts about Foles? Where do you rank him in terms of quarterbacks who would play for his team?
Yeah, it's similar to Bob's opinion, where if you look at it from a guy that it would take from a whole season consistently, from that perspective, I'm not sure if he'd be higher. Definitely wouldn't be higher than the Cunninghams and the McNabbs and probably even Hurts on a consistent basis, because he had such a shaky career in some senses. But for a 5-game stretch or a 6-game stretch, just that short period, if I needed a quarterback to get hot, I mean, Foles might be number 1 on that list with everything that he did. It's just weird to put into words just the legacy that he left, because he was only really good with the Eagles. I mean, got traded to the Rams, really struggled. Didn't pan out with Jeff Fisher, went to Kansas City. Talked about it before that. I mean, there was one point where he was going to step away from football. In 2017, he goes back to the Eagles as a backup to Wentz. Wentz gets hurt. He comes in and he wins the Super Bowl. No one could have predicted a path like that. It might be the craziest one that we've ever seen from any player in NFL history, but without him, the Eagles don't win a Super Bowl. He was amazing in the NFC Championship. He was amazing in the Super Bowl. And you mentioned Chris or Bob in 2018, played really good down that stretch to get him in the playoffs. And he was always the player for some reason that just gave the offense a jolt when they didn't have it, especially in that 2018 season. They weren't really productive on offense, and he came in, he just gave them a different energy. You remember guys like Chris Long, just seeing it from the outside, just building a shrine for him. His teammates obviously loved him. But it's tough to take away what he did. He did one thing that no other quarterback's been able to do in franchise history, is win a Super Bowl. So he had a really good career here for short spans and a weird career other than that. But he's a guy that you have to put at the top of the list, and he'll always be a legend. And I think if you went around and you pulled NFL players, a lot of them might take his career, even though it was kind of up and down and weird, because no one's ever going to remember the name or not remember the name Nick Foles.
For me, the mark of a good player, or a mark of a player that gets respect, is what he does when it's called upon and you're not really looked upon or needed. Because to be a backup quarterback is really tough. You're sitting on the sideline so much. Everybody just thinks like, hey, you look really cool. Congratulations. You see him in that shot with the coach, and you're just standing there with the ball cap going, yeah, we're good. Yeah, okay, yeah, that looks good. For him to come in there, and he struggled. I think a lot of people forgot before the playoffs, he struggled in a couple of those two games before the divisional round. And he got things straight out. They tailed the offense to him and everything else. But he didn't let that get to him. He didn't let that get it down. He really dug in and deep, and he really performed very well and timely. I mean, would we have seen him put up all those offensive yards consistently, like say if he was a starter? Probably not. But when it mattered in terms of when it came to the Super Bowl, when it came into the playoffs, he was willing to put the players, he was able to be what they needed. And he was able to help his teammates around when it was needed. He was the guy and that's what you embody when you think about athletes that have come through the city and athletes that you want to be a quarterback. So congratulations to Nick Foles on that retirement. It sounds like he's already having fun with that with his family and Chris, some of his outside interests.
I'm going to add one more amazing stat about Nick Foles. He earned $34.2 million from the Rams, Chiefs, Bears, Jags, and Colts, and $17.3 million from the Eagles. I think only one of those teams got their money's worth, and they got it tenfold. So.
Yeah, yep. And I guess we'll end it on that today. I want to thank you guys very much for tuning in and listening to us. Make sure you reach out to us. Let us know how the show is. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't done so already, and leave reviews. We want to see what you guys think about the show as well. So for Bob and for Cayden, I'm Chris. Everybody have a good one. See ya.